Should equal opportunity prevail in higher education?
How are you defining equal opportunity?
Well, I mean, how do you define it?
I got
an idea. We're going to define it different ways.
I define it as promotion of diversity.
Okay.
And yes, it should.
So equal opportunity is not based on merit.
Merit plays a role.
Okay.
But there are other considerations that have to be brought into the mix as well.
So if Harvard professes to be an institution of higher learning that is exemplary in the recruiting and attaining of students who are the brightest minds in America, and they disallow somebody who may be a little bit brighter in favor of someone who is still bright, but maybe not quite as bright, you think that's consistent with the mission of Harvard, and you think that's exhibiting equal opportunity?
All right, there are two things here. Number one, I don't know if you're talking about quotas here, and I'm not promoting quotas.
Okay.
But I am promoting the idea of diversity in education. And I think that one of the things that higher education should do is promote diversity of ideals, diversity of those who attend the universities, so people can have contact with individuals who are not similar to themselves.
Okay, if we're going to have an effort, an orchestrated, organized, intentional effort to create diversity amongst our student body, should those same rules apply to professors?
Yeah, and they do.
So well, if the same rules apply to the professors, then how is Donald Trump president?
I don't understand what your point is.
The question would be, if we're trying to create a student body reflective of mainstream society, obviously the brightest minds, but we want Asian Americans, we want African Americans, we want Hispanics, and we want white people, but we want the real smartest of those groups of people. If 85% of college professors are liberal, why don't the same rules apply to the professors at college as they do the student body? In other words, if we're trying to create diversity, because diversity to me doesn't just mean, how you look or what your ethnicity is. Diversity is also a lot of different thought and persuasions. And what I'm arguing is, if 85%, and that's kind of the number that we've come up with, there's some studies that show 90%, there's some that show 80%. But if our young people are going to Harvard or Francis Marion, for that matter, and are being educated by a diverse group of professors, why is the overwhelming majority of professors liberal?
Well, I think that one of the things that's been shown is that higher education does help open up a world that oftentimes people may not be aware of.
Okay.
And that's one of the goals of higher education, to get people out of their comfort zone.
What I'm arguing,
to look
Scott,
at,
you know what I'm arguing. It appears to me that Harvard is very hypocritical. They're saying we want our student body to be diverse, but the same rules don't apply to our professors, because we know the majority of our professors see the world in a very liberal worldview and would embrace this diversity. But we've got a president who was very inconsistent with their views, that a large share, I'm not going to say the majority, because the majority did not, but a large share of in essence, why are college universities not about 50-50 with the number of conservative professors and the number of liberal professors if they're so committed to diversity?
Well, there's two issues here. Number one, how you define what's conservative and what liberal. I mean, we've talked about this on the show before. How you define a conservative today would not be the way you defined it 20 years ago.
So how do you define diversity?
Well, and again, there's an issue we have to look at as well.
And you're making my point. We get real squishy when we start going down that road.
But what you're suggesting is that college professors are going to come up and indoctrinate their students, and make their students believe in liberal ideas. A good professor is one who says, here are the variety of ideas out there. I'm going to talk to you about that variety of ideas. My job is not to indoctrinate. My job is to teach you what we know about this. And here is what we know. Here are the different ideas about it. And let's talk about this and discuss these ideas so that you can see the different ideas that are out there.
But you wouldn't at least give me some agreement that it is a bit hypocritical for Harvard to force diversity upon its student body. In essence, that's what they're doing, all the while allowing for the overwhelming majority of the people teaching these kids that they so want desperately to be diverse to have a political opinion that are almost monolithic.
I don't think there's any kind of an issue there in terms of being hypocritical. As you can have a liberal point of view. The question is, are you indoctrinating? I think a good professor doesn't do that.
Stick with me. So if every student at Harvard were Asian American, You think it's impossible for every student at Harvard, Asian Americans, to be diverse?
In terms of what we're talking about, in terms of ethnicity?
Well, you're making my point. That's what I'm arguing. There is no definition to diversity.
Well, what you're talking about here is that, I mean, diversity is defined in different ways, but certainly there's ethnicity, race, gender, sexual orientation. Those themselves are promotions of is diversity right there.
But Harvard has chose to define diversity as it relates to ethnicity. You would agree to that?
In large part.
Okay.
That's the way it's looking, yes.
So I'm arguing that if they're going to define diversity the way they choose to define diversity, and it's pretty obvious the way they defined it, they're disallowing more academically inclined Asian Americans in preference to less academically inclined Hispanics, whites, and African Americans, then why couldn't someone else define diversity in a very different way? In other words, why could I say as a supporter of Harvard that if you're going to force diversity on the student body, I want diversity to be about political opinion and persuasion, and I want the professors to be diverse and reflective of the American culture and society, because in essence, that's what the leadership at Harvard is saying. We want our student body to look like America. We want a certain percentage of African Americans. We want a certain percentage of Asian Americans. We don't want the brightest minds. We don't want the smartest kids. We want our student body to reflect what we believe society looks like. That's how they've defined diversity. Why should they be able to define diversity and other people not?
Well, there's two issues here. Number one is you're talking about affirmative action, what we're getting at here. And affirmative action has historically been based on issues of race, gender, and ethnicity. And that is where the colleges have been looking at in terms of promoting that ethnic or racial or gender diversity. What you're talking about is political orientation, that type of diversity. And yes, those individuals who are higher educated generally are going to be more liberal in political orientation. But what you're suggesting is that then those individuals are going to go out and indoctrinate their students to believe a liberal ideology. My argument is a good professor doesn't do that. A good professor says, here are the range of opinions. Here is what we know based on the historical facts and based on the different ideas that have been thrown out there by the academics, by the politicians, and let me teach you the different views that are out there so that you then have an educated enough understanding you can make a decision on your own.
Okay, let's use the definition of diversity that Harvard applies to its student body. You're a Kansas State football fan.
Yes.
Should the football team at Kansas State be 70% white?
No, I mean, whoever
the best players are.
Yeah.
Whoever the best players are play the game of football, but whoever the best students are don't necessarily get into Harvard.
Well, now, hold on a second. But you could have a player who ends up on the team, doesn't get a scholarship, but turns out to be a far better player than you believe that player was going to be. Just as you might have somebody who gets admitted to Kansas State who may not be academically the best student, but turns out to be a very, very good student. We were talking during the break. One of the schools that I applied to was Brandeis. That's where my father went for his undergraduate. And they asked me questions during the interview process, not about my GPA or my SAT scores. They want to know more about me. What kind of music did I listen to? What do I like to do on the side for hobbies? What do I do for fun? Those kinds of questions, because they want to know more about me and learn more about my interests and see if I'm someone who could grow. And just as a football player, somebody who's a walk-on, maybe he's never played college in his life, but somehow something clicks and that person turns out to be a really good player, ends up getting a scholarship, maybe even goes pro. That's the kind of thing that these schools are looking at as well.
I don't believe for a second that the football team at Kansas State or the University of South Carolina, my favorite team, should be diverse and reflective of society. What I believe is the best players should be on the team. And if the best players are African American, so be it. I also don't believe that diversity should apply to who gets accepted to Harvard or not. I think once you decide to get away from a merit-based system, the system based on who the best football players are, who the best baseball players are, who the best basketball players are, and who the best students are, we have these confusing conversations that really ramble about and don't make a lot of sense to me. And that's why I believe that diversity should not be a part of making decisions that should be based on the merit of that decision. So, see, I think it's inconsistent. I think it's a bit hypocritical to say that I support Harvard's decision on wanting diversity in its student body, but I think it's okay for 85% of the football team at Kansas State to be African-American when 60% of its student body is probably something other than. That's, to me, it's absolutely inconsistent and borders on the hypocritical.
Well, and these players who are going on the football team, they're individuals who have chosen to be on the team, though some have gotten scholarships, of course. But there are those.
But they're on the team because they're really good at football, right? I mean, they're athletic guys who are good at football.
Well, I wouldn't call Nathan Peterson a very good player.
Well, I mean, I'm just saying.
But anyway,
by and large, the better athletes play sports, right?
Generally, yeah.
Okay, and nobody insists that 60% of the football team at the University of South Carolina has to be white, because that is the diversity of our state. That's the diversity of our student body. That's the diversity of our country. I just think it's hypocritical to say we're going to let a merit-based system apply in some places, but we're going to pick and choose where we don't want merit to apply, because I believe that Harvard has an obligation, if they profess to be an institute of higher learning to the nth degree, and they do. It's one of the most elite colleges in America. You know that. I know that. You probably could have gotten in. They would have given me the time of day. Having said that, I've got no problem if every student at Harvard was Asian American, if they were the most gifted and academically inclined students. And if you don't believe that, then you kind of sort of got to believe that we got to find a bunch of white guys to play on this football team, whether they're good enough or not.
But is not one of the ideas of the founding fathers themselves to create a well-rounded citizen? And is not diversity and having somebody be exposed to diversity through education
but not
one means?
forced on it, Scott. I think people. But let me say this, and I'll give you ample opportunity to follow up. I think diversity is a wonderful thing. I think the more diverse our country is, the better off we are. But I don't think it's government's job to socially engineer diversity. I think diversity happens in the workplace. Diversity happens on the football team. Diversity happens in the institutions of higher learning. But government right now is trying to engineer. And here's what I'll say. To the kid, the Asian American kid who scores better than the white kid, the Hispanic kid, or the African American kid, you're not being given an equal opportunity. And I know you believe in equal opportunity. I believe in equal opportunity. If you're an Asian American student and you make 1,600 on SAT, and a white, Hispanic, or African American kid make 1,350, and they get accepted, they take your spot into the incoming freshman class at Harvard, you were not afforded an equal opportunity. You were, in fact, discriminated against. I think it's clearly that in the name of diversity. But I believe that our systems function better when we reward merit. And the better students should go to the better schools. The better football players should go to the better football programs. The better businessmen and women should run the better run businesses, or the more lucrative businesses.
Well, number one here is you're focusing solely on the academic scores. There are other things that universities look at as well, such as, for instance, are you somebody who was really involved in extracurricular activities? Were you president of the student body? What have you done beyond the academics? You could have somebody who has a 1,600 SAT and a 4.0 GPA and has done nothing with regard to extracurricular activities, where somebody with a 1,400 SAT and a 3.5 GPA was president of the student body and played sports and was involved in all kinds of clubs. That person will probably get a better chance of getting into that top-notch university than the other individual. But also higher education has seen itself, and I think for the better, in promoting the idea that this is a diverse nation, and that being exposed to people of different backgrounds, different beliefs, is a good thing because it makes you a more well-rounded individual.
And we don't disagree with that. Willingly being exposed to different beliefs and different perspectives and different ethnicities, I'll totally agree to that. But not the government forcing nor mandating that we must be diverse. We must be this. We must be that. We must have. I would ask a follow-up question to you when you talk about the well-roundedness. You got a running back. One runs a 4.440. The other runs a 4.740. But the guy running a 4.740, he volunteered at the soup kitchen. He was a scout leader. I mean, who's going to get the start at running back?
I understand that.
But what I'm arguing is...
But you're comparing sports to academics here.
It's higher education. It's diversity. I mean, we're talking about higher educations want to be reflective of society in general. The professors are monolithic. The sports teams aren't diverse. But we want the student bodies to... I mean, it's inconsistent. To me, it's hypocritical.